Hey there, all you creepers and reapers. Welcome to another episode of the Femme Fatalities. I'm your co-hostess, Anna, and I'm here with...
Hey, Grieflings and Frightlings, it's Margaret and Anna. We've got another awesome episode for our listeners and viewers. What are we talking about today?
Well, today we're going to have to hop along a little bit and cut through the threads and talk about how we're all kind of connected with ourselves, but also maybe a little disconnected. We are talking about the Jordan Peele hit, Us. Before we get into it too much, we do have to mention there are some different themes and triggers that may occur while watching. There is scissor horror, self-reflection horror, also missing children, animal abuse, animal cruelty. What else, Margaret?
Ooh. Social commentary. Some people really struggle with films that have social commentary, and you know me, I love Jordan Peele. I feel like he's the master of horror, and he's also the master of beautifully weaving in social commentary.
Absolutely, I agree. And it's fun. There are lots of Easter eggs throughout the movie, too, and we'll get to that in a little while.
Literally.
Yes. But the movie itself, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. If you have, it kind of centers around a family. They go to the summer house for the first time after the matriarch grandmother has passed away, and they end up going to a beach. The mother, Adelaide, is very, very protective of her family, especially her children, doesn't want them wandering off. The kiddos end up seeing some weird things, particularly her son. They go home, and later they have very unexpected house guests, to say the least.
Yes. Oh, so are you ready to jump into Adelaide? And so the movie talks about, right, we get towards the end where Red is telling Adelaide about how the underworld, how it was developed, that people were going to try to control the people above the earth with these puppets. And so they divided them, and the souls stayed above ground, and the puppet was below ground. So then who has the soul? What happened to the soul? Was Adelaide and Red actually the exception? Because if we go back to the beginning and we learn at the end that Adelaide sees Red, and Red imprisons Adelaide in the puppet world so that Red can actually take over Adelaide's life. And listeners, viewers, we'll just keep Adelaide as the one above ground and Red as the one below ground so it doesn't get super confusing.
Yes, and it was very interesting for me to watch. So I will be honest, I was getting myself really hyped up about watching the movie because a few people had told me their opinion and synopsis of it, which had nothing to do with the movie at all. So I was pleasantly surprised. But when Adelaide encounters Red in the funhouse when she's little after she goes in, I was amazed at the end at the malevolence that Adelaide possessed. I was like, wow. And to me, it was really fascinating to know that, okay, this whole government experiment essentially is tethering you to your shadow without you realizing it. And they say a few times, 2 bodies, 1 soul. So is it really a question of if you're above ground, these are all of like, quote unquote, the positive aspects of yourself, and then whatever's left over is underground, or whomever you are above ground, whatever you're lacking or the opposite of that is underground, right? Because walking around on this earth, we encounter people that have phenomenal impacts on us. We also encounter people that really, for lack of a better way to say it, damage us. So I'm like, okay, well, if someone who's damaged you up here, is their tether like actually a nice person? Because we encounter like a happy, healthy family unit in the film. So we're looking at Adelaide and her husband and her kids, and we're like, oh, what a great family, really nice people. So of course their tethers are opposite that. But like, what if they were a dysfunctional family? Would their Tethers be like, a TV family? That's my question. And it just
Ooh.
really, really has me wondering. And I love this movie because so many questions arise. Like when you're watching it, after you watch it, when you think about it, it really makes you question a lot of things.
Yes. Ooh, I love that perspective because for me, I took the people above ground as the civilized versions of us. So we're going to be the nice family and we're going to present this way. And we're going to, like, the Tethers were what we suppressed. So then they were
Mhm.
the angrier versions of us. They were the primitive versions of us, the us that we didn't let out. Like when Adelaide, who we learn is Red, is
Mhm.
killing the actual Adelaide, we
Yeah.
hear that primitive. She's like, "Ugh," like the
Mhm.
grunt. So I took that as we pretend to be nice. We pretend to be
Mhm.
these people above ground. And I feel like he alluded to that, the niceties that we engage in. We're below ground. People are just
Mhm.
like zombies
Yeah.
copying what we were doing.
Well, yeah, and they said too that like they gave up on the experiment. So then the Tethers are just kind of left there with no purpose, nothing to do. And when Red gets swapped out, um, and she does the dance performance, she even says in the movie, I realized I had a purpose. And I was like, what an above ground concept to have, right?
Mhm.
Because how many of us in the walking world every day are searching for a sense of purpose? And I'm like, did that rejuvenate all of the Tethers in a way where she could actually orchestrate this takeover plan? Because before they were walking into walls, as you said, and just eating raw rabbits. Like there was no systematic approach to anything, which is very curious to me because if they're supposed to be tethered to us, even though they gave up on the experiment, if they exist, wouldn't the invisible lines still be there somewhere?
I think they were. I think to her son. And I wonder because her son was the youngest, so those
Mhm.
that tether, because I that's why they had the scissors. They were literally cutting the tether to their
Mhm.
other selves. Think about how the son learns early on that Pluto, his
Yeah.
tethered part, his shadow part, mirrors him, mimics him. Because remember, towards the end, when they
Mhm.
realize they're going to blow up the car, and her son slowly starts walking back, and Pluto
Yeah.
mirrors that, and he's able to get rid of him. So I feel like you
Mhm.
bring up, when do the tethers, our shadow parts, start to develop a consciousness like we see with the
Mhm.
daughter, with Adelaide Red, with the husband, with the
Mhm.
family friends, where, or is it because of Red? Is it because she was like, stop, just like, think
Mhm.
about when we see the underground and the carnival and how people are like spinning in circles.
Oh,
I
yeah.
wonder if it was Adelaide or Red who was like, stop, like,
Mhm.
we deserve to be above ground. We are not like, and I think about how we suppress stuff and that suppression comes up and we want to
Mhm.
send it back underground.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's wild just to think of the concept of the movie also like creating these shadows or attaching these parts to you, like a third party's doing this essentially so that they can control you. And that's quite an issue in our society too. I mean, when we look at systemic oppression, socio-political issues, socioeconomics, I mean, there are so many things that go on in this world that are essentially, partially, if not fully, embarked on by a third party, right? And then we're just subject to whatever happens because of that causation.
I feel like, so would you say that part of the message of this film is that we are already being controlled, and this is a visualization of how government already is controlling us?
I really wouldn't know about that because I'm not a poli sci type of person, but I could definitely see that type of commentary. Yeah.
Yes.
But and on the other hand, though, what's a society without any rules or without any order?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's kind of one extreme to another, because I feel like the Tethers have come up. They're going to kill their, soul sharer, and then they're going to take over the earth. But they still have no rules, no regulations, no order, especially now that Red is dead. So what's going to happen? They're just going to stand around, because now they have no one to mimic, no one to kind of teach them what to do, right? So conceptually, the grass is greener, or you can see the grass on the other side, I suppose I could say. But it still needs fertilizer, right? So what are you going to do? You have all these dreams about, okay, once I get there, things will be better, but how? So it's kind of the actuation of the takeover plan. Great. And I love the nod to Hands Across America too. But what happens after that? And I guess maybe we'll never find out. Maybe that's a question that Jordan Peele wanted people to ask.
Yes, or like that's such a wonderful question. What happens afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there still government created the underground? So even if the underground's going to come above ground, they'll still be the controlling agent that will do something to control and bring order back. So then the tethers end up being what they thought they wanted, like the grass is greener on the other side, realizing that it's not better, that this was not really gonna work for them. And that we often take over in violence. I wonder if that was part of it. We don't say, hey, how do we get along? There's a sense of there, like this violence.
Yeah, like there's no, well, and I think too, if society at large would have been made aware that there were tethers, you would have the groups that were very empathetic to the situation, right? And then ones that didn't want to know about it, and then so on and so forth, just like with anything going on in the world. And then how would that be handled, and how to proceed? Like, if you're empathetic, do you go bust your tether out and bring them up here? What exactly would that look like as well?
Yes, and how many people don't want that? If we look at metaphorically, how many people want to keep that tethered part, that darker part, that more primitive part of ourselves underground, not to face it, not to have that self-empathy?
Yeah, and I thought the family friends, when the girl from Handmaid's Tale, I forget what her character was called, but when her tether comes up, she's also vain, right? Because we learned that she had a little work done, and then her tether's like going to take her scissors and have a DIY moment. And that caught my attention, because to me it almost seems like your tether is in some way your opposite. And I was like, well, they have that in common. And I thought that was very clever, because once you think you're starting to learn and know about the tether population, you learn something else.
Yes, even her husband, like when he holds out his hand to help her and he does that, it was like, ooh, like they are.
Yeah. Well, and that's, because the, society at large version of him thought he was funny too, but he wasn't. And then his tether thought he was funny, but he wasn't. And it's just a lot of parallels. And I wonder, though, because the manner in which they behave as a family unit is so different than Adelaide's family. They're already what I would call mildly dysfunctional. You can sense the resentment between the spouses. He's boozing it up. She's fantasizing about killing him. But, I mean, to what level, we don't know. The daughters are kind of bullying other kids. So compared to Adelaide and her husband and their children, very, very different dynamics. So perhaps that's why we're seeing more commonalities.
Ooh, I really, thank you. I really appreciate that point. So in the beginning, right, we see Jeremiah 11:11, and then throughout the
Mhm.
film we see 11:11. So I
Yeah.
looked that up, right? And so for our listeners, Jeremiah 11:11, let me find it here on my notes. Here we go. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. I am about to bring on them disaster that they cannot escape. They will cry out to me, but I will not hear them.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I feel like that goes back to your point about like what's going to happen. There
Yeah.
is this disaster that is unleashed. And to add to that, so I also was really curious about the bunny symbolism.
Mhm.
And so I found an interview with Jordan Peele where he said, bunnies represent the gray area where religion and magic and the unexplained meet science. Between the two, you have an abomination, a metaphor for humanity.
Hmm. Well, I took it more at face value, the fact that bunnies reproduce so quickly.
Yes.
Right? Because that's what bunnies are kind of known for. Wow. Okay. Interesting. And the Jeremiah 11:11. I went to a Catholic college for my undergrad. They, no matter your beliefs, you have to take theology to graduate. But a huge theme in a lot of biblical text is free will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the disaster that we kind of bring onto ourselves is the fact that if you subscribe to that religiosity, we as humans have free will, and what are we going to do with it? And what do we know to do with it, right? Because everyone
Mm-hmm.
who's walking up, and I'm just referring to the upper world as society at large, we're kind of educated and trained on how to behave and what you should and shouldn't do, right? But the tethers don't have that sort of education. Do they even have a concept of free will? Do they know what that is? Because they've been, I don't want to say ostracized because we don't know they exist, but they've been unto themselves for so long that, the government's given up on them. They're not part of an experiment anymore, but they still exist. They have no access to TV, news, media, anything. Red's probably the only one that was educating them because most of them aren't even able to vocalize in a way that we would understand them.
To talk about no free will, they were
Mm-hmm.
created not to have free will
Mm-hmm.
to then stop
To
free
be
will,
controlled.
which was such
Yeah.
like a huge, as you were saying in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, this movie is one of those movies where not only are you thinking during it, afterwards, you're
Mm-hmm.
starting to be like, oh my gosh, oh my goodness, because that's one thing I
Mm-hmm.
love about him. He just creates these layered
Yes.
movies that
Mm-hmm.
you get the symbolism, you get his foreshadowing, you get all these
Yes.
beautiful ways that he leads you through. Like rabbits,
Mm-hmm.
talk about like not only the physical rabbits there were
Oh, yeah.
sprinkled
Mm-hmm.
throughout, and then afterwards you're like, oh, you go deeper. It's almost right for Jordan Peele lovers, you are the above ground, and then that
Mm-hmm.
escalator that takes you to the tethered. That is what happens after you watch his films. You're on the
Mm-hmm.
escalator going to the underground and like, oh, this is the deeper meaning.
Right.
And I hope listeners and watchers, I hope that you get to geek out like we do on this, because that's what makes his movies
Yes.
so fun. And you sell
Mm-hmm.
yourself short if you stay at the surface, because there is so much more. I
Yes.
mean, I would love to have dinner with the man and just pick his brain and see like,
Absolutely. I
tell
think,
me more. He's just
yeah,
brilliant to me.
he has a phenomenal perspective. And I think that, there are so many contributing factors to that. And I really appreciate that. I've not, knock on wood, I've not seen a Jordan Peele movie that I did not like. Of course, I have my favorites in a specific order. But the other thing, though, I've got to say, is the Hands Across America. So the connecting map that she was watching on TV read when she was little, um, there's a blue person amongst the red. Is society at large the blue person? Is the government the blue person? Or is there some other, you know, body or character or entity that we're not even aware of.
Ooh, that's it. I am ordering his annotated script with comments to see, because
Mhm.
he is such a methodical
Mhm.
thinker. I think that's what another reason I love his films, because there's so much thought that goes
Yeah.
into it that you're like, wow, like
Yeah, it's not
yeah,
as
he
though
just
he wakes up one day and he's like, okay, I just wrote like a slasher movie. There's actually something that gives the audience an eagerness to connect with the film.
yes.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
definitely, I would say it's almost something I would call art rather than film, because he really just well done. Jordan Peele, if you ever listen to this, well done. Because it's
Yes,
just
it is
phenomenal.
art because it is
Yeah.
in
It's
so
so
many ways. Like you
deeper than like,
yes.
yeah. He's like, if you know like certain movies you're just gonna go watch and there's gonna be like a bucket of blood and like some brains and that's it. But this is so beyond that.
It's like layered art. Like slasher films, like their art is
Mhm.
oftentimes the art of the kill or the
Yeah.
special effects. And that's why we watch them. He's like, okay, I've got that art and I've also got social
Mhm.
commentary and I'm also going to have this story that is
Yeah.
complete. I feel like
Uh-huh.
watching his movies, I'm left with more questions that I feel like he knows the answers to
Yeah.
than when we watch a movie and we're like, oh, there's a
Mhm.
plot hole there. And that feels like a plot hole. That feels like in
Mhm.
making this movie, you just missed that. And that happens.
And I wonder also
Like People
how,
Within.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, in Adelaide, right? So she comes up and her parents are like, this is not our daughter, right? So she has a complex anxiety trauma response. And at least that's what they're diagnosing her with because they don't know the truth. But
Mm-hmm.
just think about how she assimilates herself back into the family unit. Like the amount of probably television she has to watch, the amount of family photo albums, the amount of family history. She has to learn how to talk because the Tethers, they don't have these speaking vocalization skills that we do. So it really probably, for the parents, was comparable to having a newborn, or
Yes.
at least maybe toddler age.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And as you're sharing that, like how Red had to adapt and become Adelaide, and
Mm-hmm.
the therapist is right. Have her draw, have her dance, have her do these
Mm-hmm.
things to, if the switch had never happened, Adelaide would have never become a
Mm-hmm.
dancer. So then, well, if the switch had never happened, the taking over, the becoming untethered
Mm-hmm.
would have
That,
never happened. The tethered would have died underground and we would have stayed civilized, because I feel like Jordan Peele is poking fun at our
mm-hmm.
idea
Oh yeah.
of civilized, that we call, like, I think somebody says, who are you? And somebody goes, we're Americans. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh, what a thing to say right there. Like he's poking
Right.
fun at entitlement and privilege
Yeah.
and
Well, and also I think that there's a lot of socio economic commentary too, just in terms of how people react to the homeless gentleman in the movie. Um, Also, the beach scene where everything is beige. Everything is beige. That stood out to me because you have primarily Caucasian appearing persons, and then you have this gorgeous black family. But you can see from that huge zoom out, everything's beige except for Adelaide and her family. And I'm like, talk about social isolation. Not even to the tether point, but just the idea of civility and what that means in a beige environment versus an environment that has rainbow hues of color.
as you're saying that, I love that you bring that up. That makes the jumpsuits make sense to me, because the above ground, everything is isolated, beige. We have rainbow colors, but the rainbows are isolated. The
Mm-hmm.
Tethers don't care about that. The Tethers are coming in red jumpsuits with their brown gloves on and their gold scissors,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't care about color of skin, and
Mm-hmm.
they are holding hands across America, like this
Yeah.
coming together of society, the undone.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel like that he's taking us back to, if the Tethers are primitive, back to when we were more primitive, more like village people, to where skin color didn't matter? You were your community based on where you lived and were part of a community. What do you think?
I think it really speaks to the theory that um, identity is a social concept.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not introduced to that social concept, you're not going to create subgroups amongst your group, right? So, society at large, we have so many different identities. And I don't even mean just cultural, ethnic, racial. I mean, even identities in the workplace, identities educationally, identities by the things that we consider hobbies. All of those things, we identify ourselves. And if someone sees someone that has a commonality based on that identity, you know automatically, like, oh, okay, like I'll see Margaret, right? She's wearing a heart shirt, I'm wearing a heart shirt. We know automatically, okay, they're cool. Or at least in our mind, like, this is an okay person, this is a cool person. But the Tethers have never been introduced to any of those ways of thinking. And I really think that the social hierarchy, norms, all of those things should be looked at and evaluated in new and different ways. And the movie really displays an idea of that. Maybe not an idea of how to do that, but an idea of, hey, wake up.
Ooh, that's wonderful how you put that together and how they are this community. Because when we see them, they are very individual. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe Red, when she's talking to Adelaide, even says, I had to be with him. I had to have my
Mm-hmm.
children because of your choices, because
Mm-hmm.
you as an individual impacted me as an individual. I didn't get free will. I didn't get
Yeah.
free choice. And I just had to run around again. Like it
Mm-hmm.
stood out to me how
Yeah.
individual they were in the
Mm-hmm.
tethered
Oh,
land until they came
mm-hmm.
together. And so I'm curious, because you texted me and you were asked me what stuck out to you.
Mm-hmm.
What scenes to you really you were like they live like in your brain, or what, like the
Mm-hmm.
beige beach and like what
Yeah.
else?
Well, the hands across America, like, immediately I was like, oh, put that together. Um, I think just part of it too, something that did stand out to me was the diagnosis of PTSD. And Margaret and I recently did attend a seminar about this. And I was like, well, actually, I think it was a complex anxiety or trauma response, from like more of, a thanatological loss perspective, right? But the thing that stood out to me was when the kids flipped, I thought about it. Talk about loss of identity and, disenfranchised grief here. These are really major things. And I definitely, whether it was intentional or not, I think that Jordan Peele has entered the grief wheelhouse. And I really appreciated that. What about you? What stood out
Yes.
to you?
Ooh, I really thank you for touching on like the grief and the trauma. And even I wonder how long Adelaide stayed handcuffed to that bed and how she couldn't then find her way
Yeah,
back out of the tethered world. Well, it feels like at that point she's stuck because
yeah,
she's not going to be able. She's a little
yeah.
girl. So that's right, as so yeah, all that grief that
Mm-hmm.
happened for those
But
two characters.
you
But
know,
like, yeah.
someone who was a tether had to have some sort of empathy, though. to uncuff her. Unless she broke the bed and got
Yeah.
out herself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was like, whoa, like she ended up trapped
Mm-hmm.
down there.
Yeah.
And that Red took her voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah. So what else stood out to you?
the rabbits. The rabbits, just that symbolism. And then
Mm-hmm.
the beginning where we see them all in the cages. And then throughout the movie, we see them hopping
Mm-hmm.
around. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's just like, he was really like, hey, this is a
Mm-hmm.
metaphor I want you to
Yeah.
pay attention to.
Absolutely. Well, and from a practical application, the tethers have to have some sort of knowledge or working base, because so my mom bred rabbits when she was a kid. Breeding rabbits is not like for the faint of heart. It's not easy. But to consistently have bunnies, you have to breed them. You have to feed them. You have to water them. You have to clean up after them. You have to take all of these actions. We know that the tethers were abandoned. They were doing this. So for me, it's like, as much as I want to believe they're just like brutish and primal, I know that they're not, because when I look at the fact that someone uncuffed her, the rabbits are reproducing and being cared for, and even from the practical perspective of, I have to care for these animals, these are my food, it's still happening. And then it kind of begs the question of, what are you really capable of, right? If no one acknowledges that you exist, you still are here. And
What a brilliant take. Like, you're still here, even if nobody knows that you exist. You still exist.
Absolutely. And from, I think, the grief perspective, right? Anyone out there who's listening to this, if you're going through some sort of grief, change, loss, trauma in your life, and it's not being acknowledged, you're not being supported, you don't have someone you feel safe to talk to, just because they're not acknowledging what you're going through does not mean you're not going through it. You're still going through it. And just remember that there are a lot of supports and services available to you. You are not alone. So don't forget that. You're not a real life tethered person because of someone else's lack of acknowledgement of your experience. You're not alone. So please don't forget that.
Ooh. Thank you. And as you were talking about not being alone, and I wonder so we see Red, that's or
Mm-hmm.
Adelaide when she's a little girl and she's in the therapist office. And you talk about grief, and it almost seems like she has this awareness that tethered dad and above world dad, they lack some empathy. They are
Yeah.
not always the nicest person. He's showing a little bit more love above ground,
Mm-hmm.
but it's almost like it feels like she has this
Yeah.
look like he's not as different as, like, there's still these similarities that are happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe part of that too is because the government was still present when the little girls switched, Red and Adelaide switched out. And then after it left, maybe there was a stronger difference in the tethers. But I think that her dad, society at large dad, and tether dad was very much a dad of that time. Yeah.
I think that's how we answered our question. If the government was still there, they would have unhandcuffed her and they would
Yeah.
have kept her there. She couldn't have escaped
Mm-hmm.
because they would have still been
Yeah.
there.
But maybe they would have killed her too, or used her for something. So they
But she
had to be.
couldn't talk. So think about it. They're like, okay, how'd this happen? And
Mm-hmm.
think about it. If it's your job, maybe your job to keep an eye on the tethers, and then you
Mm-hmm.
realize one's been handcuffed. Oh
Yeah.
shit, I don't know how this happened. I don't want to look into this.
You
I'll
just
just let
go.
her go.
Yeah.
She can't talk. So she
Yeah.
already fits in. So they're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And then if she's trying to leave, they're like, no, like
Yeah.
this tether is acting weird, and so then she can't
Mm-hmm.
escape.
Yeah. Well, and the mirroring of birthdays and holidays and events, it kind of made me think, the theory of we're all actually in the Matrix. What if it's all pretend? What if none of any of it is actually real?
Yeah. Real is what we make
Mm-hmm.
real.
Yeah. It's
And
like a,
I think that goes back to your question in the beginning about like the tethers and this uprising. They're
Mhm.
real. They're like, I don't want this real. I want that other real. I'm tired of eating raw rabbit. I'm tired of walking around aimlessly. I want to be above ground. I want that real. I don't want the underground real anymore.
yeah, to feel the sun on their face. I mean, could you imagine being a tether person and walking out and feeling the sun on your face the first time ever? It had to be just
And I
one
want
of
to
the
give
dreams.
props.
Yeah. Huh?
The makeup that
Oh,
they
yeah.
did to the acting, amazing. And then how they made the actors, their
Yeah.
underground them, look like they hadn't seen sun compared to
Mm-hmm.
their above ground people. I was like, this is because I don't know about you. I'm like, I think that's the same actor, but I'm not sure because they
Mm-hmm.
had looked just different
Oh,
enough. I'm
yeah.
like, it's the makeup because they're
Mhm.
tethered, they're underground, they have to. And yeah,
Oh,
the acting, oh,
yes.
phenomenal.
Yes. This is kind of a horror film that should have gotten way more attention, many more accolades, many more awards. I really think a lot of critics related to award ceremonies missed this film because it's just
Hmm.
phenomenal. And maybe people weren't ready for it. And that seems to be kind of, and we'll get to some of his other movies coming up, but it seems to be a commonality with some of Jordan Peele's works is that not everyone is ready for it.
Which I agree with you is sad because horror, as we've discussed before, is a platform that is often used to bring out social commentary, to create social awareness, cultural
Mhm.
awareness. And again, because of society infrastructures, he doesn't get the accolades, or people, they're like, oh, I
Yeah.
want my horror to be
Hmm.
Jason or Mike Myers.
Yeah. I don't want to have to go to a movie and think. You know? Which is absolutely fine too. If you want to go zone out, like more power to you. And if you want to go and have an introspective experience, that's wonderful as well.
Well, they're missing out because
Yeah.
wouldn't you agree? It goes back to the beginning. Even if we look at slashers, those are still social commentaries. They're saying don't have sex as a teenager, don't don't do drugs, don't drink. Oftentimes, horror movies have this
Hmm.
undercurrent of either wanting to influence society or saying something about society by the nature of them. Or maybe it's just us, because I know both you and I talk about what what was the writer thinking, what was the director thinking, because
Hmm.
we can see the
Yeah.
influences. You and I were just talking about Osgood Perkins and how we can see the influence of being Anthony Perkins' son
Hmm.
and his complex life, how that has influenced Osgood's narratives and his films.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, and I think too that we all kind of have a genre that gives us a lot of reflection, but we also have a genre that we just want to veg out to, right? And so I know some people that like have the deepest thoughts after watching a comedy movie. I eat my popcorn and go home, and and that's
Mhm.
okay, right? Different things speak to us in a variety of ways.
Ooh, yes.
Yep. But we are here to talk about horror and our perspectives on it. And hopefully, maybe if you're listening, you have a similar or different perspective and we're adding to your experience. Because at the end of the day, that is
Yeah.
our hope is to talk about these movies and also talk a little bit about thanatology and just to remind you that film and art are great ways to kind of work through a myriad of experiences and emotions, and that, you know, there's a lot of support out there, a lot of service. You're not alone, and don't ever forget that, because truly, as lonely as things can feel sometimes, you're not by yourself.
Yes. Ooh, thank you for sharing. We all have our tethers. We're not
Yeah.
alone. We're just also tethered to people like up here,
Mhm.
like we see with the family, like that family unit really coming
Mhm.
together, staying together, looking out for each other. So, with that, Anna, who do you most relate to in this movie?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably the bunny. All right, yeah, I think probably the rabbits. Like, I'm here. I know I serve a purpose, but I'm trying to figure out, do I have to serve that particular purpose? Help me. Um, just because, yeah, I think that so many of the other characters were so complex, but we don't really get to know any of them. So I think I would say the bunny rabbit. What about you, Margaret?
I am going to have to go with Above Ground Adelaide Red, the adult version, the one that is protecting her kids. I could relate to her, like when she was on the beach and like, where is my child? And
Mm,
that almost helicopter parent energy and that reflection of her own childhood traumas, then making her want to protect her children from having any sort of trauma.
mm. And I thought that part of that also was that Adelaide knew that at some point Red was going to come for her. So I think the fear was also driving her, not just the childhood trauma, but also the fear, like, I did something too. So when she comes for me, in a sense, I've brought this on myself.
Isn't that like our trauma, like our past? For so many of us, we fear that our past, that our trauma, that what has happened is going to come
Mhm.
back. It haunts us. And then we live in fear because we're waiting for it to come back to confront us.
Yeah, and I think too, the a lot of us, even though in reality we don't bring these things on ourselves, we feel guilty and we feel like it is our fault, right? So don't be
Mhm.
like Adelaide. You didn't bring this on yourself. It's not your fault. But I think that, to me, that's a huge difference, right? So we don't know up until the end that, wait a minute here, you like choked the real Adelaide out, cuffed her to a bed, and then went and took her spot. Like, um, you know, it's kind of just, and now you're afraid that she's gonna come to seek vengeance. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty, given the fact of what we know about the tethered community, that's a pretty viable theory.
Yes. Ooh, and that, right? So there are consequences for what she did.
Mm-hmm.
And we could even go bigger picture. If that swap had never happened, the tethered most likely would have,
Yeah.
I don't know how long, died out or just kept, maybe they'd
Mm-hmm.
become like hills have eyes people under there. We don't know. And
Right.
so often, like, what was it, that quote that like I shared with you that Jordan Peele had said about when he made this movie with us, my hope
Mm-hmm.
was that the audience would begin to get a sense that they were active participants in the journey,
Mm-hmm.
charged with connecting the dots. The coincidences within the film itself and its uncanny moments are meant to feel foreign yet familiar, like deja vu, deeper connections with a moment that we cannot fully understand. So I feel
Mm-hmm.
like you're touching on his point, and that's a touch point, and then that ripple effect,
Yeah.
how if I make a choice and I might have somebody seeking vengeance or wanting to clear or whatever, talk about it, maybe
Mm-hmm.
I want to apologize, that there's this ripple effect that we often don't know what's going to happen and how are we part of that. If I didn't do something mean, then maybe we could go to Flatliners and
Oh yeah. I mean,
Kevin Bacon, right? We could say maybe he would never have become a doctor if he hadn't have bullied that girl in school.
right.
So, or we hear that if you hadn't bullied me, I would not have come to do these great things in life. So we often miss those profound moments.
Well, yeah, and you're right. And you can see that in Red's perspective that she's tethered, especially after the recital scene. She believes she is the savior to the tethered community. She was swapped out for a purpose greater than herself.
Yes. So many layers, so deep.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
What do you imagine your tether would be like?
That is a great question. So, would you agree the tethers are the parts of us that we suppress, are more primal parts of ourselves?
It's whatever your perspective is, because it's your tether.
Oh, I don't know. My tether is probably a bit more gruff. Then I'm going to say my tether, if I had to look at in the movie, Adelaide's husband, how he's kind of like the fun dad and this, and his tether's kind of like, ugh, ugh. I feel like my tether's more like his tether, more of that like, ugh, ugh. Like, what about you?
Like Cro-Magnon lady. No. She's just more direct. Yeah, I think mine is, for me, when I watched the movie initially, I kind of had this whole idea that like they're really the opposite of you, or maybe they embody things that you see in other people that you hope you don't emulate in terms of your behavior. So I feel like my tether would be like just very selfish, like extremely selfish and rude, thoughtless, like all of those sorts of things that I associate with negative behavior. I also feel like if she came up to like society at large, she'd probably like go to a tanning booth, like, you know, just emulate this aesthetic that is not for me. Very caution to the wind, never think about anything, act on the baser instincts, that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, you're right. The primal, just act on those primal urges, not have any thought about, consequences of actions.
As listeners, viewers, tell us, what is your tether like?
Absolutely. Definitely tell us, and let us know what you thought of this movie as well. If there's anything that we hit on or we didn't mention that really caught your attention, please let us know. And stay tuned. We've got more Jordan Peele type films that we're going to be talking about, as well as a variety of others. So until next time, remember to eat those coffin cookies, drink your bruja brew, and howl at that full moon. We will see you soon.
Yes, don't forget, like, subscribe, follow, comment. Thank you for viewing and listening, and we'll see you next time.